Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I've been a truck driver for 23 years, and I thought I'd seen everything you could encounter on the road during that time. Breakdowns in the middle of the night, drug addicts who made truck stops their home, prostitutes knocking on doors, even near misses with drunk drivers. But what happened last month at that rest stop near Tulsa still makes my hands shake when I think about it. My name is Burl Hackett. I was hauling refrigerated goods from Houston to Chicago and, as usual, trying to stick to a tight schedule. Around 3:10, I pulled into the rest area off Interstate 44. It was almost completely empty. Just a few trucks scattered here and there, their headlights casting amber-colored glows in the darkness. I had been driving non-stop for about 9 hours. My eyes had long since started playing tricks on me. You know what happens when you stare at that yellow line for too long? Everything blurs. Your mind starts seeing things that aren't there. That's why I decided to pull over and take a break. The rest area was one of those old-style facilities, probably built in the 70s. Concrete block buildings, dimly lit sodium lamps painted everything a nauseating orange color. Even in daylight, it had an unsettling, unwelcoming atmosphere. But at 3 a.m, it felt downright hostile. I parked my rig near the edge of the lot, away from the other trucks. I like my space when I sleep. Don't want to deal with other drivers coming and going, slamming doors and starting up their engines. Plus, I had my .38 tucked under my pillow, and I didn't want any trouble that might make me have to use it. I was just settling into my bunk when I heard it. A voice, high and desperate, cutting through the rumble of idling diesels. "Help me! Please, somebody help me!" At first, I thought maybe I was already dreaming. You hear all kinds of things when you're half asleep in a truck stop. But then I heard it again. Clearer this time. "Please, I can't get out. Help!" I sat up, looked out my window. The voice was coming from somewhere deeper in the lot, maybe 3 or 4 trucks over. It sounded like a man, but there was something off about it, something that made the hair on my neck stand up. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, thought about grabbing my gun too, but decided against it. Might just be someone locked in their cab somehow. Battery dead, can't get the door open. Happens more than you'd think with these new electronic locks. I climbed down from my cab, and the cold October air hit me like a slap. The parking lot was eerily quiet except for the constant diesel rumble. The voice had stopped, but I knew which direction it had come from. As I walked between the trucks, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, I started to feel real uneasy. You develop a sixth sense after years on the road, and right then, every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive away. But I couldn't just leave if someone really needed help. I passed a Freightliner, then a beat-up Volvo with rust eating through the door panels. The next truck was a Peterbilt, one of those extended cab models with the big sleeper. The truck was dark, no running lights, engine off. But I could hear something coming from inside. Not voices exactly, but movement. Shuffling. "Hello?" I called out. "Someone need help in there?" The movement stopped. Dead silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then, clear as day, I heard it. "Yes, please help me. I'm trapped." It was the same voice, but now that I was closer, I could tell something was definitely wrong. It was too perfect, too clear, like someone speaking through a high-quality speaker rather than through the walls of a truck cab. I walked around to the driver's side, shined my light up at the window. It was covered from the inside with what looked like aluminum foil. The passenger window, too. That's when my unease turned to genuine fear. You see, in all my years driving, I'd never met another trucker who covered their windows like that. Sure, some guys use curtains, or those reflective sunshades, but aluminum foil? That's what people do when they're cooking meth or hiding something they really don't want anyone to see. "I'm going to call 911, I said loudly. "They'll get you out." "No." The voice was urgent now, panicked. "Please, no police. Just try the door, please." I took a step back. Everything about this felt wrong. The covered windows, the strange quality of the voice, the insistence on no police. But then I thought, what if someone really is trapped in there? What if some poor soul is being held against their will? I reached for the door handle, then stopped. Through the tiny gap at the bottom of the window, where the foil didn't quite reach, I saw movement. An eye, bloodshot and wild, staring directly at me. But it wasn't the eye that made me stumble backward. It was what I saw behind it. More eyes. At least 3 or 4 pairs, all crowded together, all looking at me through that tiny gap. "Come on," the voice said. But now I could hear it properly. It wasn't coming from one person. It was multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. "Just open the door. We need help." I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet. My hand found my phone, and I started dialing 911 as I moved. But before I could finish, the door of the Peterbilt flew open. A man stumbled out, or at least, I thought it was a man at first. He was wearing trucker clothes, jeans, and a flannel shirt, but something was terribly wrong with how he moved. His limbs seemed to bend in too many places, like his joints weren't where they should be. And his face, God, his face was the worst part. It was like someone had taken features from different people and tried to mash them together. One eye was blue, the other brown. His nose was too far to the left. His mouth was moving, but the words were coming from somewhere else, somewhere behind him, in the darkness of the cab. "Please help us," the voices said in unison. "We're so tired." More figures started emerging from the cab. I counted at least 4, all moving with that same wrong-jointed shuffle. All with faces that didn't quite make sense. They weren't moving fast, but they were spreading out, trying to surround me. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran faster than I'd run in 20 years, my flashlight beam swinging wildly as I sprinted back to my truck. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running, but moving with a horrible shuffling gait that somehow seemed to be keeping pace. I yanked open my door, hauled myself up into the cab, and slammed the locks. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. In my mirrors, I could see them standing in a semicircle around my truck, just outside the reach of my headlights. They weren't trying to get in. They were just standing there, swaying slightly, like trees in a breeze. I started the engine, threw it in gear, and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop driving until I hit a well-lit truck stop 50 miles down the road, one of those big commercial places with security cameras and lots of people around. I did call the police eventually, told them about suspicious activity at the rest area, possible human trafficking or something. They said they'd send someone to check it out. I never heard back from them, and honestly, I didn't follow up. I didn't want to know. I looked up the incident online a few days later, searched for news about the rest area, about any arrests or discoveries. Found nothing, but I did find something else that made my blood run cold. A trucker forum, buried deep in the search results. A thread from 5 years ago. Someone describing the exact same thing. The same rest area, the same covered windows, the same wrong-jointed people. Only in his story, he mentioned a name. said one of them had been wearing a CB handle patch that read Doc Pruitt. I knew that name. Doc Pruitt had been a trucker out of Oklahoma City. He'd gone missing about 7 years ago, along with his entire rig. Just vanished somewhere on I-44, never seen again. His family had put up missing posters at every truck stop from Texas to Missouri. The thread had 3 replies. Other drivers who'd seen something similar, always at that same rest area, always late at night. One mentioned seeing a woman among them who'd looked familiar, turned out to be another missing driver from years back. Another said he'd recognized a truck in the lot, belonged to a buddy of his who'd disappeared on that road. I kept scrolling, found more threads, more stories. They went back years, decades even. Drivers who'd stopped at that rest area and seen things, heard things. Some who'd investigated and barely escaped. Others who'd called the police only to be told nothing was found. And then there were the missing driver reports. Dozens of them. All last seen on that stretch of I-44, all driving alone, all vanishing without a trace. I found one more thing that night, something that made me close my laptop and pour myself 3 fingers of whiskey. A news article from 1983 about a rest area renovation. The old rest area had been built on top of something else, something from the 1950s. The article didn't say what exactly, just mentioned previous structures that had been demolished. But there was a photo, black and white, grainy, showing construction workers standing around a hole in the ground. And in that hole, barely visible, were what looked like truck cabs. Multiple truck cabs, buried and stacked on top of each other like some kind of mechanical mass grave. I don't drive that route anymore. I'll take the long way around, add hours to my trip, eat the extra fuel costs. The company doesn't like it, but I don't care. Some roads you just don't travel, some places you just don't stop. But sometimes, late at night when I'm parked at a safe, well-lit truck stop, I think about that rest area. I think about those things wearing the faces and clothes of missing drivers. I think about Doc Pruitt and all the others who disappeared on that highway. And I think about Clem Treadwell, another name I recognized from the missing driver posts. See, I knew Clem. We'd run the same routes for years, had coffee together maybe a dozen times at various stops. Good man, family man. Disappeared 3 months before my encounter at that rest area. The thing is, I'm pretty sure one of those faces in the dark, one of those wrong-jointed figures stumbling out of that Peterbilt, was wearing Clem's face. Not perfectly, not quite right, but close enough that I recognized him. Close enough that when those multiple voices spoke in unison, I could hear a hint of his Dallas drawl mixed in with all the others. I never told his widow that part. When she called me after he went missing, asking if I'd seen him or heard from him, I just said no. What else could I say? That I'd seen something wearing her husband's face like a mask? That he was part of something that lived in a covered truck at an abandoned rest area? That would only cause her more pain. But I know what I saw. And I know that rest area is still there, still open, still drawing in tired truckers in the middle of the night. The state hasn't shut it down, hasn't investigated properly. Maybe they can't. Maybe whatever's there is too old, too entrenched, too good at hiding during the daylight hours. I've thought about going back during the day, with other people, with cameras and witnesses, but I won't. Some things, once you've seen them, you don't need to see again. And some knowledge, once you have it, you can't unknow it. Every time I hear about a trucker going missing on I-44, I wonder if they stopped at that rest area. I wonder if they heard voices calling for help. I wonder if they were good Samaritans who investigated, who tried to help. And I wonder how long it takes before they become one of the voices, calling out from the dark of a covered cab, begging the next driver to please just open the door. I changed my routes permanently after that night. Started carrying more than just my .38 too. Got myself a shotgun. Keep it loaded with buckshot. Not sure it would help against whatever those things were, but it makes me feel better having it. The company asked why I suddenly refused to take the Chicago runs through Oklahoma. I told them it was a health issue, that my doctor recommended I avoid that particular route. They didn't push it. Maybe they knew something. Maybe other drivers had refused that route too. I still drive nights sometimes. Can't avoid it in this business. But I'm careful about where I stop. I research every rest area, every truck stop. I look for patterns in missing person reports. I pay attention to the stories other drivers tell, the ones they whisper about when they think no one's listening. Because here's the thing about being a trucker. The thing civilians don't understand. We're out there in the dark spaces between cities, the lonely stretches of highway where anything can happen and often does. We see things that don't make the news, things that get explained away or covered up or just ignored. That rest area on I-44 isn't the only place with secrets. There's a way station in Nevada where drivers have reported seeing figures that aren't quite human manning the scales at night. There's a stretch of I-10 in Texas where trucks have been found abandoned. Their drivers' clothes left behind like they just evaporated. There's a truck stop in Montana where the night shift workers all have the same face, the exact same face, and they'll serve you coffee with a smile, but their eyes never blink. We share these stories at truck stops, in CB conversations late at night, in forums and message boards hidden away from the general public. We warn each other about the dangerous places, the routes to avoid, the stops where you shouldn't get out of your cab no matter what you see or hear. Most people think the danger in trucking comes from accidents, from falling asleep at the wheel or jackknifing on ice. They don't know about the other dangers, the ones that hunt in the spaces between the lights, the ones that wear familiar faces and speak in chorus voices. I've got maybe 5 more years before I can retire. 5 more years of nights on the highway, of rest areas and truck stops, of constantly checking my mirrors for things that shouldn't be there. 5 more years of jumping at shadows and avoiding certain routes. Sometimes I think about Doc Pruitt and Clem Treadwell and all the others. I wonder if they're still aware in some way, trapped in whatever those things were that I saw at the rest area. I wonder if they're trying to warn us, or if they're trying to lure us in to join them. I'll never know, and I'll never stop at that rest area again to find out. But if you're ever driving through Oklahoma late at night and you see a rest area with just a few trucks parked in the shadows, maybe keep driving. And if you hear someone calling for help from a truck with covered windows, definitely keep driving. Some people aren't meant to be saved. And some things that call for help aren't people at all. The worst part is knowing they're still out there. Every night, that rest area is open. Every night, truckers pull in, tired and looking for a safe place to rest. Most of them probably leave without incident, but some don't leave at all. I check the missing person reports sometimes. The numbers keep going up. Truckers vanishing on that stretch of highway. Their rigs found abandoned or never found at all. The authorities call it coincidence, say it's a dangerous profession, that people disappear for all sorts of reasons. But I know better. I know what's waiting at that rest area at 3 a.m. I know what's calling for help from inside those covered cabs. And I know that once you answer that call, once you open that door, you become part of something that should never have existed. My wife asks why I don't sleep well anymore, why I wake up in cold sweats. I tell her it's just stress from the job. I don't tell her about the nightmares where I'm back at that rest area, where I opened the door instead of running, where I became one of those things shuffling in the dark with someone else's face stretched over my skull. The dreams are getting worse. Sometimes I dream I'm driving my regular route, and suddenly I'm on I-44. Heading toward that rest area. I try to turn around, but the road won't let me. I try to stop, but the brakes don't work. and as I get closer I can hear them calling through my CB radio, dozens of voices speaking as one. "Come back, Burl. We're still here. We're so tired. Help us rest." I had my CB removed after that started happening. Now, I drive in silence, just the sound of the engine and the wind. It's lonelier, but it's safer. No chance of hearing those voices calling through the static. There's a new driver at my company, young kid named Patterson. Eager, ambitious, wants all the long hauls he can get. He asked me about the Chicago run through Oklahoma, said he heard I used to drive it all the time, and wondered if I had any tips. I told him to take I-35 instead, even though it adds 2 hours to the trip. Told him about construction, about traffic, about anything I could think of to keep him away from I-44. But I could see it in his eyes, that young driver confidence. He thought I was just being an old-timer, overcautious and set in my ways. He took the I-44 route last week, made it to Chicago fine, delivered his load. But on the way back, his GPS tracker showed he stopped at a rest area around 3 a.m. Stayed there for about an hour, then started moving again. He came back 3 days ago. Parks his truck differently now, backs into spaces so his cab faces out. Covers his windows when he sleeps, not with curtains, but with aluminum foil. And when I asked him how the trip went, he just stared at me with eyes that seemed a little too bright, a little too wide. "It was fine," he said. But when he talked, I swear I could hear an echo, like someone else was speaking the same words just a fraction of a second behind him. The rest area was very helpful, very accommodating. You should try that route again sometime, Burl. They asked about you. I reported him to management, said he was acting strange, might be on something. They did a drug test, came back clean, did a psychological evaluation, said he was fine. But I see him sometimes in the lot, standing by his truck at odd hours, just staring at nothing. And sometimes, late at night, I hear voices coming from his cab, multiple voices all saying the same thing. I'm putting in for early retirement, taking the penalty, losing money. But I don't care. I need to get away from this, away from the highways and the dark spaces between cities. I'm moving somewhere landlocked, somewhere far from any interstate, somewhere I'll never have to wonder what's waiting at the rest areas in the middle of the night. But even as I plan my escape, I know it won't really help. Because once you've seen what's out there, once you know what's hunting along our highways, you can never really get away from it. It's in your head, in your dreams, in every shadow that moves when it shouldn't. The road has secrets. The night has teeth. And some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. I leave you with this warning, though I know most won't listen. If you're ever driving late at night and you see a rest area that feels wrong, keep driving. If you hear someone calling for help from a truck with covered windows, keep driving. If you see faces that don't quite match the bodies they're attached to, definitely keep driving. Because the thing about the road is that it's hungry. The highway at night is a different world. After 18 years behind the wheel of a Kenworth 900, I thought I understood that world. I knew its rhythms, its dangers, its unspoken rules. But what happened on Route 287 through Wyoming last October taught me that some things on the road are worse than anything I could have imagined. My name's Vern Mobley, and I was hauling steel beams from Denver to Billings. It was a routine run, one I'd made dozens of times before. The weather was clear, the road was dry, and I was making good time. It was 3:25 a.m. when everything went sideways. I was about 40 miles north of Laramie, nothing but empty highway and sagebrush for miles in every direction. That stretch of 287 is lonely even during the day, but at night it feels like driving on the dark side of the moon. No lights except your headlights, no sound except your engine and the wind. That's when I saw the car. It was a sedan, looked like a newer model Toyota, sitting sideways across both lanes. The hazard lights were going, blinking that urgent amber rhythm that makes your stomach drop. Steam or smoke was rising from under the hood, and in my headlights I could see the front end was crumpled pretty bad. I started downshifting immediately, thanking God I'd been keeping a reasonable speed. 80,000 pounds of truck and steel doesn't stop on a dime, but I managed to bring her to a halt about 50 feet from the wreck. I grabbed my flashlight, my phone, and my emergency kit, then climbed down from the cab. The night was cold, that high desert cold that cuts right through you. The only sounds were my idling diesel, the tick of the car's hazards, and the hiss of something leaking under its hood. I approached carefully, calling out as I walked. "Hello? Anyone hurt? I'm here to help." No response. I could see the driver's side door was open, interior light on. The airbags had deployed, white fabric hanging limp like deflated balloons. There was blood on the driver's seat. Not a lot, but enough to make me move faster. I swept my flashlight around the area, looking for whoever had been driving. The blood trail led from the driver's seat out onto the asphalt, then toward the shoulder of the road. Fresh blood, still wet and gleaming in my light. "Hey!" I called louder. "Where are you? I've got first aid supplies." That's when I heard it. A voice, weak and pained, coming from the darkness beyond the road's edge. "Help! Please help me!" I followed the blood trail off the road and into the scrub brush. About 20 feet from the pavement, I found him. A man in his 30s wearing a business suit that was now torn and bloody. He was lying on his back, one hand pressed to his stomach, blood seeping between his fingers. "Jesus," I muttered, dropping to my knees beside him. "Hang on, buddy. I'm calling 911. I pulled out my phone, but of course, no signal. Not unusual out here, but it meant we were on our own until I could get him back to my truck and use the CB. "What's your name?" I asked, pulling supplies from my first aid kit. "Oral," he gasped. "Oral Stump." Strange name, but I'd heard stranger. I pressed a gauze pad against his stomach wound, trying to slow the bleeding. In the harsh LED light of my flashlight, I could see his injuries were bad. Real bad. The kind that needs a hospital 10 minutes ago. "Okay, Oral, we need to get you to my truck. I've got a CB radio, can call for help. Can you walk if I support you?" He nodded weakly, and I helped him to his feet. That's when things started to feel wrong. Really wrong. As we stood, I noticed his weight felt off. Too light for a man his size, like he was hollow somehow. And the blood on my hands, it was warm, but it felt wrong too. Too thick, too sticky, almost like syrup. "The others," Oral mumbled as we started walking. "Need to check on the others." I stopped. "Others? There were other people in the car?" He nodded, his head moving in a way that made my skin crawl. Too loose, like his neck muscles weren't working right. 3 others. They're around here somewhere. I looked back at the wrecked car. It was a sedan, could hold 5 people total, but something about the damage didn't add up. The front end was smashed, yeah, but not from hitting something. It looked more like something had hit it, crushed it from above. "What happened?" I asked as we shuffled toward my truck. "What did you hit?" "Didn't hit anything," Oral said, and his voice was getting stronger, which shouldn't have been possible with the amount of blood he was losing. "Something hit us. Came from above. Big. So big." We were halfway to my truck when I heard footsteps behind us. I turned, expecting to see another survivor from the crash. What I saw made me nearly drop Oral. It was a man, but he was walking wrong. His legs bent backward at the knees, like a bird's, and his arms hung too long at his sides. His face was visible in the spillover from my truck's headlights, and it was completely expressionless. Not calm, not blank, just absent, like someone had forgotten to put an expression there. "That's one of them," Oral said. "That's Newt Bagwell. He was in the back seat." Newt Bagwell approached us with that horrible, backward-jointed walk, his two long arms swaying. As he got closer, I could see his clothes were torn in strange patterns, like something with claws had grabbed him. But there was no blood, no injuries that I could see. "We need to go," Newt said, and his voice was flat, monotone. "More coming." "More what?" I asked, but neither of them answered. We kept moving toward my truck, Newt following behind with his disturbing gait. I was supporting most of Oral's weight now, and that wrongness about him was getting worse. He felt less like a person and more like I was carrying a bag of thick liquid in the shape of a man. That's when the third survivor appeared. She came from the opposite direction, from behind my truck. A woman in what had been a nice dress, now shredded and hanging in strips. She was walking normally, thank God, but as she got closer I could see her eyes. They were too wide, showing white all around the irises, and they never blinked. Not once. "This is Sarah," Oral said. "She was driving." Sarah looked at me with those unblinking eyes. "You shouldn't have stopped," she said. Her voice was normal, human, but coming from that face it was somehow worse than Newt's monotone. "It knows you're here now." "What knows I'm here?" I demanded. "What the hell is going on?" Before anyone could answer, I heard it. A sound from above, like wings, massive wings. The sound got louder, closer, and all three of the crash survivors looked up at the sky with what I can only describe as recognition. "Inside the truck," Oral said urgently. "Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I half-dragged, half-carried him to my cab, yanked open the door, and pushed him inside. But when I turned to climb in after him, Newt Bagwell was right there, his backward legs having carried him impossibly fast. He grabbed my arm with a hand that felt wrong, too many joints in the fingers. "You can't leave," he said in that flat voice. "You've seen us. You're part of it now." I jerked my arm free and scrambled into my cab, slamming the door and hitting the locks. All three of them stood outside, looking up at me through the windows. Not trying to get in, just watching. Then I saw what they were waiting for. Something descended from the dark sky. At first, I thought it was a piece of the night itself breaking off and falling. It was huge, maybe 30 feet across, and it moved like liquid smoke given form. As it got closer to the ground, I could make out details that my mind really didn't want to process. Wings that weren't quite wings, more like tears in reality that caught the air. A body that shifted and flowed, never keeping the same shape for more than a second. And eyes, dozens of eyes, all different sizes, opening and closing randomly across its surface. It landed on the road behind the wrecked car, and the asphalt cracked under its weight. The three people outside my truck walked toward it, that wrong-jointed walk becoming more pronounced with each step. As they got closer to the thing, they began to change. Oral Stump's skin started to ripple and flow, like the wound in his stomach was spreading. Newt Bagwell's backward legs bent even further, until he was walking on all fours like some nightmare spider. And Sarah, unblinking Sarah, her mouth opened wider and wider until it split her face in half. They weren't survivors. They were never survivors. They were something else, something that used the shape of crash victims to lure good Samaritans. The thing on the road let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite anything that should exist. My windshield cracked from the vibration. Then it spread those terrible wings and lifted off, taking the three things that had pretended to be human with it. They clung to its underside like parasites, their bodies melting and reforming as they merged with it. I sat there in my cab for maybe 10 minutes, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Then, very carefully, I put the truck in gear and drove around the wrecked car. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove straight through to Billings, only stopping for fuel when absolutely necessary. When I finally got to a place with cell signal, I called 911 and reported the wreck. Gave them the mile marker, told them there was an abandoned car blocking the road. Didn't mention the rest. What would I say? That I'd seen people who weren't people being collected by something that shouldn't exist. I checked the news for weeks after. The car was found, but there was no mention of bodies, no mention of blood. The vehicle was registered to someone in Colorado who had reported it stolen 3 weeks earlier. No one knew how it ended up wrecked on that empty stretch of Wyoming highway. But I did find something else. Other reports, buried in trucker forums and paranormal websites. Stories about wrecks on remote highways where good Samaritans stopped to help and were never seen again. Descriptions of survivors who walked wrong, who felt wrong, who led would-be rescuers away from their vehicles and into the darkness. And always mentions of something coming from the sky, something huge and impossible that collected the false survivors like a shepherd collecting sheep. I don't drive nights anymore. Told my company it was a health issue, which isn't really a lie. The lack of sleep was killing me because every time I closed my eyes, I saw those things outside my truck, looking up at me with faces that were almost human. I take day runs only now, even if it means less money. But even during the day, I think about it. About how many wrecks happen on remote highways at night. About how many good people stop to help. About how many of them never make it to their destinations. I think about Oral Stump, who bled convincing blood and spoke with a human voice. About Newt Bagwell with his backward legs and 2 long arms. About Sarah, who never blinked, who warned me even as she tried to trap me. Were they ever real people? Were there actual victims named Oral and Newt and Sarah somewhere whose shapes these things had borrowed? Or were the names as fake as everything else, just sounds strung together to seem human enough to fool someone in the dark? I'll never know. And I'll never stop to help at a wreck on an empty highway again. That makes me feel like a coward, like less of a man. I was raised to help people in need, to be the Good Samaritan. But now I know that sometimes what looks like need is actually bait. Sometimes the victim is the trap. There's a new driver at my company. Young guy, full of energy and wanting to do right by people. He asked me for advice about driving nights, about safety, about what to watch for. I told him about deer and drunk drivers and black ice, normal dangers, things that make sense. But I also told him this. If he ever comes across a wreck on an empty highway at night, especially if the survivors seem off somehow, he should call 911 and keep driving. Don't stop, don't get out, don't try to help. He laughed, said I'd been driving too long, that I was getting paranoid. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am paranoid. But paranoid is better than gone. Paranoid is better than whatever would have happened if I hadn't made it back to my truck that night. I still have nightmares about it. Not about the thing that came from the sky, strangely enough. That was so alien, so impossible, that my mind kind of refuses to fully process it. No, I have nightmares about the 3 survivors, about how human they seemed at first, how perfectly they played their parts. In the dreams, I don't make it to the truck. In the dreams, Newt's wrongly jointed hand is stronger, and he pulls me back. In the dreams, I become one of them, standing by a new wreck on a different highway, bleeding fake blood, and calling for help in a voice that sounds human but isn't. Sometimes I wonder how many of them are out there. How many wrecks on lonely highways are actually traps? How many missing truckers didn't just fall asleep at the wheel or jackknife in bad weather? but stopped to help someone who wasn't really someone at all. The company keeps statistics on driver safety, on accidents and incidents. But they don't keep statistics on the weird stuff, the things that don't fit in neat categories. They don't track the drivers who report strange things and get quietly transferred to day shifts. They don't count the ones who quit rather than drive certain routes again. But we talk to each other, us drivers. We share stories at truck stops, whisper warnings about specific stretches of highway. Stay away from Route 287 north of Laramie at night. Don't stop for wrecks on Highway 50 through Nevada. Be careful on I-10 through West Texas when the moon is new. We map out the danger zones, not based on accident statistics, but on the stories of things that shouldn't be. We know which rest areas to avoid, which way stations close at sunset for reasons nobody will officially state, which routes have too many missing driver reports to be coincidence. The public doesn't know. They drive their little cars on their weekend trips, never realizing what hunts along the highways at night. They see a wreck and stop to help, because that's what good people do, and most of the time it's fine. Most of the time it really is just a wreck, and they really are helping. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's something wearing the shape of a wreck, using our compassion against us. And once you've seen that truth, once you know what's out there pretending to need help, you can never unknow it. I've thought about quitting, finding another line of work. But trucking is all I know, and despite everything, I still love the road. Just not at night. Never at night anymore. Besides, somebody needs to keep driving these roads. Somebody who knows what to watch for. Somebody who can warn the new drivers, even if they don't believe us at first. Somebody who understands that the highway isn't just dangerous because of the normal hazards. So I keep driving. Days only, safe routes only, always watching for signs of wrongness. And when I pass a wreck, even in broad daylight, I slow down, but I don't stop. I call 911 and report it. Give them the exact location, then keep moving. Maybe that makes me a bad person. Maybe I've let fear override my humanity. But I know what I saw that night on Route 287. I know what was pretending to be Oral Stump and Newt Bagwell and unblinking Sarah. And I know what came from the sky to collect them. Some people say the highway is haunted. They're wrong. Haunted implies ghosts, spirits of the dead, things that were once human. What's out there on the dark roads is something else entirely. Something that was never human, never of this world, never meant to exist in the same reality as us. But it does exist. It hunts using shapes that look like us, voices that sound like us, scenarios that trigger our instinct to help. It feeds on something, though I don't know what. Maybe fear. Maybe flesh. Maybe something we don't even have a word for. All I know is that it's out there, on the empty highways at 3 a.m., waiting for the next Good Samaritan to stop and help. Waiting with fake blood and backward legs and unblinking eyes. Waiting to add another missing driver to the statistics that nobody wants to examine too closely. The road has always been dangerous. But now I know it's dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with ice or fatigue or mechanical failure. Now I know that sometimes the danger comes from above, collecting its human-shaped lures after they've served their purpose. I still drive. I still love the highway, but I'll never again be the man who stops to help a stranger in the night. That man died on Route 287, even if his body made it back to the truck. 27 years I've been driving trucks, and I've used every kind of restroom you can imagine. Pristine corporate travel centers with marble countertops and automatic everything. Questionable gas station bathrooms where you hold your breath and pray nothing crawls out of the drain. those portable units at construction sites that could make a grown man cry and seriously consider the bushes as a viable alternative. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found at the Diesel King truck stop outside Cedar Rapids on that November night. Name's Dub Creech. I was hauling a refrigerated load of frozen poultry from the Tyson plant in Omaha all the way to Milwaukee, trying to beat the morning traffic and make my delivery window. It was exactly 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday when I pulled into the Diesel King. I remember the exact time because I'd been watching the clock, calculating whether I could make it to the next stop or if I needed to pull over before my bladder exploded. The place was one of those older independent stops, the kind that's been around since the 70s and looks every day of it. You know the type. Wood paneling that's more nostalgia than style, faded signs advertising cigarette brands that haven't existed for decades, and that general atmosphere of slow decay that clings to places that peaked 40 years ago and have been sliding downhill ever since. The parking lot was mostly empty when I pulled in, just 4 other rigs scattered around like islands in an ocean of cracked asphalt. 2 were older Peterbilts. 1 was a newer Volvo, and the 4th was a Freightliner that looked like it had seen better decades. No lights on in any of the cabs, which meant the drivers were either asleep or had gone inside. The main building was a low, sprawling structure with that fake wood paneling that was everywhere in the 70s, now warped and weather-beaten into something that looked diseased. Half the exterior lights were out, and the ones that worked cast this sickly yellow sodium glow that made everything look jaundiced and wrong. The sign out front, one of those old rotating ones, was stuck halfway through a turn, frozen on D's ING, with the rest hidden behind. It creaked in the wind, a lonely, metallic sound that set my teeth on edge. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight, mainlining coffee like it was my lifeblood, and now all that caffeine had to go somewhere. My bladder was screaming at me with the kind of urgency that makes rational thought impossible. I could have used the portable toilet in my sleeper cab, but it needed emptying, and honestly, after being cooped up in the truck for hours, I wanted to stretch my legs. Plus, I figured I could grab another coffee for the road, maybe a candy bar to keep my blood sugar up. The moment I opened the door to the main building, I knew something was off. It's hard to explain if you haven't spent years in truck stops, but they have a rhythm to them, a feeling. Even at 3 a.m., even the quiet ones, there's always some sign of life. A TV playing somewhere, coffee maker gurgling, fluorescent lights humming, maybe some tired driver chatting with the clerk about road conditions or complaining about dispatch. But this place was wrong quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of quiet that makes you think everyone just vanished mid-sentence. The only sound was the buzz of dying fluorescent lights, that particular frequency that drills into your skull and makes your teeth ache. The clerk behind the counter was a heavy-set guy in his 50s, maybe 60s. Hard to tell under the harsh lights. He was wearing a uniform shirt that might have been blue once but had faded to a color somewhere between gray and sadness. The name tag said Earl in letters that looked handwritten with a dying Sharpie. He was staring at a small portable TV, one of those ancient models with the built-in VCR, but the screen was just static, not changing channels, not adjusting the antenna, not doing anything, just sitting there, eyes fixed on the snow, like he was seeing something in those random patterns that I couldn't. "Bathroom?" I asked, my voice too loud in the oppressive silence. He looked up at me real slow, like he was surfacing from deep water. His eyes were bloodshot to the point where the whites were more pink than white, with dark circles under them that looked like bruises. When he blinked, it was deliberate, mechanical, like he had to remember how to do it. "Round back," he said, his voice flat and dusty like he hadn't used it in hours, maybe days. "Through the hallway, past the showers, last door." Something in my gut, that primitive lizard brain that's kept humans alive since we climbed down from the trees, was screaming at me to leave. Just get back in the truck, drive another 40 miles to the Flying J, use their nice, clean bathroom with the good soap and the air dryers that actually work. But my bladder was calling the shots now, and it didn't care about bad feelings or weird clerks. The hallway he mentioned was narrow and dim, maybe 4 feet wide, lit by a single bulb that flickered like a strobe light having a seizure. The walls were that fake wood paneling that was everywhere in the 70s, water-stained and peeling in places, revealing something underneath that might have been drywall, or might have been something else. The floor was old linoleum, the pattern long since worn away except for strange spots where it looked almost new, like something had been covering those areas for years. The floor was sticky under my boots, that particular kind of sticky that makes you wonder what you're walking through and whether you'll ever get it off your soles. The smell was a combination of industrial disinfectant, mold, and something else underneath it all. Something organic and wrong that made my nose wrinkle. I passed the shower rooms first. There were 3 doors, all closed, all with those old-style sliding locks that show "occupied" in red letters when someone's inside. All 3 showed occupied, which was weird considering I'd only seen 4 trucks outside and their cabs looked empty. But the really weird part was the water. I could hear it running behind one of the doors. Had to have been running for a while too, because water was seeping out from under the door, pooling in the hallway, creating a dark puddle that reflected the flickering light. The water wasn't clear. It had a rusty reddish tinge to it, like old pipes bleeding their corrosion into the flow. And it smelled wrong, metallic and organic at the same time, like pennies mixed with spoiled meat. I stepped around it carefully, the sticky floor making squelching sounds under my boots. The bathroom was at the end of the hall, past a janitor's closet with a door that hung slightly open, revealing darkness that seemed deeper than it should be. The bathroom door had a hand-painted sign that just said "Men's," with the E and N backwards like a kid had written it. Or like someone who was forgetting how letters worked. The door itself was heavy wood, painted industrial green at some point in the distant past, now chipped and scarred with what looked like scratch marks. Deep ones, like someone had tried to claw their way out. I pushed open the door and immediately wished I hadn't. The smell hit me first. A wall of stench that was so much worse than the hallway. Not the usual truck stop bathroom smell of disinfectant fighting a losing battle against human waste. This was different. Metallic and organic, yes, but also chemical, like formaldehyde mixed with rotting fruit. It made my eyes water and my stomach clench. The bathroom was bigger than I expected, maybe 20 feet by 15, with a row of 6 stalls on one side and urinals on the other. The walls were tiled in what had probably been white ceramic decades ago, but was now yellowed with age and streaked with stains that ran from the ceiling to the floor, like rust-colored tears. Some of the tiles were cracked, and through the cracks I could see something dark and wet, like the building itself was bleeding. Only one light fixture worked, a fluorescent tube that buzzed like angry wasps and flickered in a rhythm that had no pattern, creating a strobe effect that made everything look like it was moving. Stop-motion reality, everything jumping from position to position rather than flowing smoothly. In that stuttering light, I saw the footprints. They were wet, fresh, still glistening with water that had a reddish tinge like what was leaking from the showers. They led from the far stall to the sinks, then back to the stall, then to the middle of the room where they just stopped. Not like someone had stood there and then walked away. They literally just ended, mid-step, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. I could see under all the stall doors, that gap at the bottom that lets you know if someone's in there. All empty. Nobody's feet, nobody standing on the toilet to hide, nobody at all. Yet the footprints were so fresh that I could see the water still spreading at the edges, still dripping. I should have left right then. Every instinct I had from 27 years on the road, every bit of common sense, every primitive warning bell in my head was going off like an air raid siren. But sometimes your body's needs override your brain's warnings, and my bladder was about to burst. I figured I could hold it together for 30 seconds, do what I needed to do, and get out. I stepped up to the nearest urinal, trying not to look at the footprints, trying not to breathe through my nose, trying not to notice how the flickering light made the shadows in the corners seem to writhe and shift. The urinal was old porcelain, stained and cracked, with graffiti scratched into the wall beside it. Most of it was the usual truck stop philosophy and phone numbers, but one piece made me pause. Scratched deep into the tile, like someone had used a knife or maybe their fingernails, were the words, "He's in the pipes. He's always been in the pipes." That's when I heard the sound from the far stall. It was wet, a sliding noise, like someone dragging a soaking wet mop across the floor, but rhythmic, deliberate with a pattern to it. Slide, slide, stop, slide, slide, stop, like something was pulling itself across the floor, using the toilet as leverage. "Someone in here?" I called out, my voice cracking like I was 13 again. The echo bounced off the tiles, coming back distorted, like the room itself was mocking me. The sliding sound stopped. Complete silence except for the buzz of the dying light and my own breathing, which was coming too fast now. Then, after maybe 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours, it started again. Slower this time, more deliberate, and definitely closer. I looked down, and my blood turned to ice water in my veins. New footprints were appearing on the floor. Not walking from somewhere, but just materializing one after another, water spreading out from nowhere to form the shape of feet. But wrong feet. Too long, with what looked like webbing between the toes, and too many joints, like each toe had an extra knuckle. They were coming from the far stall, moving steadily toward me. Each print appeared with a soft splash, like someone invisible was walking through invisible water. And as they got closer, the smell got stronger. That formaldehyde-rot combination that made me gag. I backed away from the urinal, fumbling with my zipper, my hands shaking so bad I could barely manage it. The footprints kept coming, steady and measured, leaving a trail of that reddish water. They passed the sinks where the mirrors were all cracked in spiderweb patterns, reflecting my face in dozens of fractured pieces, each one showing a different expression of terror. The footprints stopped maybe 3 feet from me. The flickering light went solid for just a second, and in that moment of clear illumination, I saw it. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. There was something standing there, a distortion in the air like heat shimmer, but cold. The shape of a person, but wrong, too tall, too thin, joints in places where joints shouldn't be. And through the distortion, I could see eyes. Too many eyes, arranged vertically where a face should be, all of them looking at me. Then it spoke. Not with a voice, not through the air, but somehow the words formed in my head, cold and clear as frozen glass. "You need to leave. Now. Before he finishes." "Before who finishes?" I asked out loud, feeling insane for talking to a shimmer in the air in a truck stop bathroom at 3 a.m. The bathroom door slammed open so hard it hit the wall and bounced back. In the doorway stood a man I hadn't seen before, wearing janitor coveralls that might have been blue once, but were now stained with things I didn't want to identify. The name patch said Early Puckett in embroidered letters that looked too new for the ancient coveralls. But his face, Christ almighty, his face was wrong. In the strobing fluorescent light, his features kept shifting, like they couldn't decide what configuration to settle on. 1 second his nose was where it should be, the next it was 2 inches to the left. His mouth would be smiling, then frowning, then too wide, then too small, all in the space of a heartbeat. Only his eyes stayed constant, black, pupilless, like holes punched through reality. "Everything all right in here?" Early asked, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater, or maybe from underground. Each word had an echo, but the echo came first, like reality was running backwards. The invisible presence, the footprints, the distortion in the air, they were gone. Vanished like they'd never been there. Just me and this janitor with the face that wouldn't stay still in a bathroom that smelled like death. "Yeah," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "Just leaving." Early smiled, and his mouth stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. Teeth that were all canines, all sharp, all wrong. "Better hurry, storm's coming, don't want to get caught in it." I looked past him toward the hallway. There were no windows, no way to see outside, but somehow I knew he wasn't talking about weather. I pushed past him, trying not to touch him, but my shoulder brushed his arm. It was cold, so cold it burned, and for just a second I felt something under those coveralls that wasn't shaped like an arm should be. Too many joints, or maybe no joints at all, just something that writhed and shifted. I practically ran down the hallway. Behind me, I could hear Early enter the bathroom, and that wet, sliding sound started again, louder now, coming from multiple stalls. And voices, or something like voices, whispering in a language that hurt to hear, syllables that human throats weren't meant to make. The shower room doors were all open now. In the flickering hallway light, I caught glimpses inside as I passed. In the first shower, water was running, black water that moved too thick to be water. In the second, someone was standing under the spray, fully clothed, not moving, just standing there with their back to me. The third shower. I didn't look in the third shower. The sounds coming from it were enough to make me run faster. I burst through the main store area like I was being chased by hellhounds. Earl was still watching his static-filled TV, but now there were patterns in the static, shapes that almost made sense, figures that almost looked human. He didn't look up as I passed, but I heard him speak. "Y'all come back now," he said in that dusty voice. "Real soon, they're almost ready." I slammed through the exit door hard enough to set off the electronic chime, though it sounded wrong, distorted, like it was playing backwards and underwater at the same time. The cold November air hit me like a slap of reality, sharp and clean after the thick wrongness of the truck stop. I ran to my truck, fumbled with the door, climbed in and locked everything. My hands were shaking so bad it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a beautiful roar, the most normal, comforting sound I'd ever heard. As I pulled out of the lot, I looked in my mirrors. The truck stop was dark, completely dark. Not a single light on, not even the sign. The building looked abandoned, had probably been abandoned for years. Windows broken, roof partially collapsed, parking lot overgrown with weeds pushing through the cracked asphalt. But I could swear, just for a second, I saw figures standing in those broken windows. Dozens of them, all watching me leave. I drove for an hour before stopping again, this time at a well-lit Love's truck stop that was full of people, bright lights, normal human activity. I used their bathroom, but I checked for wet footprints first, looked under all the stalls, made sure the mirrors showed only one reflection of my face. When I got to Milwaukee and finally had good internet, I looked up the Diesel King truck stop. According to Google Maps, there was no truck stop at those coordinates. According to historical records, there had been one, but it closed in 2001 after a series of incidents that the articles didn't fully explain. The building had been condemned and scheduled for demolition, but the demolition company had walked off the job, refusing to say why. But I found more, so much more. A trucker forum from 2018 had a 50-page thread about the ghost stop outside Cedar Rapids. Dozens of drivers claiming they'd stopped at a truck stop that shouldn't exist, met employees who weren't quite right, and experienced things in the bathroom that made them flee. The stories went back decades, each one slightly different, but with the same core elements: the backwards sign, the wet footprints, the man in the janitor coveralls. One driver mentioned Early Puckett by name. According to his research, Early had been the night janitor at the original Diesel King back in 1986. He'd disappeared one night during his shift, and they'd found him 3 days later in the septic tank behind the building. He'd been dead for at least a week, which was impossible because multiple drivers had seen him working the night he supposedly died. Had talked to him, had seen him mopping the floors with that distinctive slide-stop pattern. Another driver, username Thurl Coker, had posted a detailed account that made my experience look like a pleasant dream. He'd stopped there in 2016, encountered the same wet footprints, the same shifting-faced janitor, the same invisible presence warning him to leave. But Thurl had been stupid or brave enough to hide and watch what happened next. According to Thurl Coker, every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., the bathroom would begin to flood. Not with water from the pipes, but with something that came up through the floor itself. Black liquid that smelled like formaldehyde and rot. The liquid would rise about 3 feet, and things would crawl out of it. Things that used to be people. Things that had drowned in the septic system over the years. Things that Early Puckett had put there. Thurl said Early would feed them. When I read what he fed them and how, I had to close my laptop and pour myself 3 fingers of whiskey just to stop my hands from shaking. Let's just say it involved the drivers who didn't leave when warned, who stayed too long despite all the signs. The feeding process was described in detail that made me understand why Thurl's last post said he was quitting trucking, selling his rig, and moving to Arizona to become an accountant. Desert seemed real attractive when you'd seen what lived in the wet places. There were newspaper clippings too, scanned and posted by obsessive researchers. Missing driver reports going back to the 50s, all last seen on that stretch of road. The numbers were staggering. At least 2 or 3 a year, every year, for 70 years. Local police had noticed the pattern, but officially attributed it to the dangerous nature of long-haul trucking and driver fatigue. One article from 4 mentioned a state trooper who'd investigated the abandoned truck stop after a driver went missing. He'd gone in alone at night while his partner waited in the cruiser. 45 minutes later, he'd come running out, got in the car, and refused to ever speak about what he'd seen. He quit the force 3 days later, moved to Florida, and became a boat mechanic. His partner was quoted as saying, "Whatever Jim saw in there, it changed him. He wouldn't even drive past that place after that." I kept digging, finding more and more. A Urban Explorer's blog from 2012 with photos of the abandoned Diesel King. In the daytime, it looked exactly as I'd seen it in my mirrors, broken, collapsed, clearly deserted for years. But in one photo taken with a flash in what used to be the bathroom, you could see writing on the walls. The same message, repeated hundreds of times in different hands, in different colors, some in what looked like blood. "He's in the pipes." The photographer had written that they'd heard sounds from the drains, voices calling for help, and had left immediately. Their last line haunted me. Some places aren't abandoned, they're quarantined. I found death certificates too, not just Early Puckett, but others. A trucker named Donald Braswell, who'd gone missing in 1978, found 3 years later during a septic system excavation. A hitchhiker named Mary Clement from 1969, discovered by accident when they were laying new pipes. A family of 4 from 1955, their Their car found in a sinkhole behind the building in 1982. All of them in the front seat. All of them drowned, even though the sinkhole was dry when found. The worst part was the dates. Every single death, every single disappearance happened between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock a.m. The exact time when tired truckers would be looking for a place to rest, to use the bathroom, to stretch their legs. I found Thurl Coker's real name through some creative searching. Thomas Coker, formerly of Des Moines, Iowa. I called him. Don't ask me how I got his number. When you've been driving as long as I have, you know people who know people. He answered on the third ring, and when I told him why I was calling, there was a long silence. "You saw him," he finally said. It wasn't a question. "Early Puckett, yeah." Another long pause. "Did you see them feeding?" "No. Got out before that." Smart man. His voice was tired, haunted. I stayed, watched, wish I hadn't. What are they? Does it matter? They're there. He feeds them. They take people. Been doing it for decades, maybe longer. The building's just the latest face of something older. Why doesn't anyone stop it? Cops? Feds, someone? Thurl laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think they don't know? That trucker, Early, he's been officially dead since 1986. The building's been officially closed since 2001. Officially, none of it exists. But truckers keep disappearing, and the Diesel King keeps appearing to the ones who need to stop at just the wrong time. So we just let it happen? We warn each other. We survive. We keep driving. That's all we can do. You can't fight something that officially doesn't exist. Something that's in the pipes, in the walls, in the spaces between what's real and what's not. He told me more before he hung up, about the pattern he'd noticed. The Diesel King only appeared to drivers who were alone, exhausted, desperate. It fed on need, on vulnerability. The more you needed to stop, the more likely you were to see it. And once you'd seen it, really seen it, you could never unsee it. You'll notice them now, he said. Other places like it. They're all along the highways, hiding in plain sight. Old truck stops that shouldn't be open. Rest areas that don't appear on maps. Way stations that only exist at 3 a.m. The road has cancer, friend, and it's metastasized. He was right. Once you know what to look for, you see them everywhere. The patterns, the places where drivers disappear. The stops that exist in the corner of your eye but vanish when you look directly. The bathrooms with backward signs and wet footprints that lead nowhere. I've driven past the Diesel King 43 times since that night. Sometimes it's there, lights on, sign glowing, still stuck on D's ing, looking like a normal truck stop that's just a little run down. Sometimes it's the abandoned ruin it's supposed to be. And sometimes, if the conditions are just right, 3 a.m., alone, desperate, I can see both at once. The two realities overlapping like double vision. Once, against all wisdom and sanity, I stopped in daylight with 3 other drivers, all of us armed, all of us determined to document what was there. We found the ruins, took photos, even went into the bathroom. It was just a destroyed, abandoned truck stop. Graffiti, broken tiles, bad smell from the old septic system. Nothing supernatural, nothing strange. But on the walls, under the graffiti, we found older writing, names and dates, hundreds of them. And at the bottom of each name the same words, still here. We left quickly after that. There's a new driver at my company, young kid named Marcus. Eager, confident, thinks he's invincible like we all did at that age. He's taking over some of my routes while I transition to regional runs, staying closer to home as I get older. I've told him about all the good stops, the ones with the best coffee, the cleanest showers, the safest parking, the The ones where you can sleep without one eye open, where the bathroom doors lock properly, where the other drivers look out for each other. And I've told him about the stops to avoid. Not just the Diesel King, but all of them. The travelers rest on Route 50, where the night clerk has no reflection. The piney wood services on I-10, where the bathroom stalls are always occupied, but no one ever comes out. The unnamed rest area on I-80, where the vending machines are always fully stocked, but the food inside expired in 1987. He laughed at first, said I was trying to scare him with ghost stories. But I gave him the forum links, showed him the missing driver statistics, introduced him to other old-timers who'd seen things. His laugh faded when he realized we were all serious, all warning him about the same places, all carrying the same haunted look in our eyes. "This is real?" he asked, voice small. "Real as anything," I told him. "The road's got its secrets, son. Some of them are just weird, some of them are dangerous, and some of them are hungry. The Diesel King is all three." He promised to be careful, to never stop at the places on our list. But promises made in daylight sometimes fade in the dark of 3 a.m. when you're tired, when your bladder's full, when you're still 40 miles from the next safe stop. I hope he remembers. I hope he keeps driving. Because Early Puckett is still there, in that bathroom with the backward sign, with his shifting face and too many teeth. Still feeding whatever lives in the pipes, whatever crawls out of that black water at 3:33 a.m. Still watching for drivers who stop when they shouldn't, who ignore the warnings, who think they're brave enough or desperate enough to risk it. I've thought about reporting it to someone with real authority. The FBI, maybe, or whatever agency handles things that shouldn't exist. But what would I say? That there's a ghost truck stop with a dead janitor who feeds creatures from the septic tank to things that live in the pipes. They'd think I was crazy or on drugs, just another trucker who'd been on the road too long. The trucking company doesn't want to hear it either. They care about delivery times and fuel costs, insurance rates, and maintenance schedules. As long as drivers aren't filing claims, as long as the freight keeps moving, they don't want to know about the weird stuff, the dark stuff, the hungry stuff that waits at 3 a.m. So we handle it ourselves, us drivers. We share the warnings at truck stops, whispered conversations over coffee at 4 a.m. when we've all made it safely past the dangerous hours. We mark the bad places on our mental maps, pass down the stories like folklore, like ancient warnings about which forests to avoid, which caves not to enter. The Diesel King is on that list now, has been for decades, but it still claims victims. Drivers who don't know the stories or don't believe them or are just too desperate to care. Young drivers who think they're invincible. Old drivers who've gotten complacent. Foreign drivers who can't read the forum warnings, who don't understand the CB chatter, who pull into the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes I dream about that bathroom. Not nightmares exactly, but something worse. Dreams where everything seems normal. I'm at a regular truck stop, using a regular bathroom, and then I notice the sign. The backwards letters. Mayans with the E and N reversed. And I know, with that dream certainty, that if I turn around, Early Puckett will be standing there with his shifting face and his too-wide smile. In the dreams, the footprints start appearing while I'm still at the urinal. Wet, red-tinged, too many toes. They circle around me, leaving me no path to escape. The black water starts rising from the drains, thick and viscous, smelling of formaldehyde and decay. And Early just stands in the doorway, smiling, saying, "Storm's coming," over and over until the words lose all meaning. I wake up checking my feet for water that isn't there, my nose still smelling that chemical rot that isn't real. My wife asks what's wrong, but how do I explain? How do I tell her that there are places on the road that exist outside the normal rules, staffed by people who aren't people anymore? Hungry for drivers who stop when they shouldn't? I don't. I just tell her it was a bad dream and go back to sleep. But I know it wasn't just a dream. It was a warning, a reminder, a promise that the Diesel King is still there, still open for business at 3 a.m., still feeding whatever lives in those pipes. I've got 3 more years until retirement. 3 more years of driving past that spot on the highway, of seeing it flicker in and out of existence in my peripheral vision. 3 more years of warning new drivers and hoping they listen. 3 more years of checking every truck stop bathroom for backward signs and wet footprints before I dare to use it. After I retire, I'm moving somewhere far from any interstate. Somewhere without truck stops or rest areas or 24-hour anythings. Somewhere I'll never have to wonder if the bathroom I'm walking into is real or something else wearing the shape of a bathroom. Somewhere I'll never have to worry about Early Puckett and his feeding schedule. But retirement won't erase the memories, won't stop the dreams, won't change the fact that I know what's out there on the dark highways, waiting in the spaces between the real and the unreal. Once you've seen behind the curtain, once you've glimpsed what lurks in the pipes and walls of reality, you can never really go back to ignorance. The worst part is the guilt. Knowing that the Diesel King is still there, still hunting, still feeding, and I'm not doing anything to stop it. But what could I do? Burn it down? It's already supposed to be abandoned. Warn everyone? They'd think I'm crazy. Stand guard and turn drivers away? For how long? Forever? No, all I can do is what truckers have always done. Share the story. Pass on the warning. Hope that someone listens. Hope that when a tired driver sees that flickering sign at 3 a.m., something in the back of their mind remembers my words and makes them keep driving. Because Early Puckett is waiting. The things in the pipes are hungry, and the Diesel King is always open for business, even when it's been closed for 20 years. Especially when it's been closed for 20 years. The road has many secrets. Some of them are beautiful, like the sunrise over the Rockies or the way the desert blooms after rain. Some of them are tragic, like the memorials at accident sites or the abandoned towns that couldn't survive the interstate bypassing them. And some of them are hungry, ancient, patient things that use our needs against us. The Diesel King is one of the hungry ones. It feeds on desperation, on exhaustion, on the basic human need to find a bathroom at 3 a.m. It's been feeding for decades, maybe longer. The building is just its current face, its current trap. When they finally demolish it, if they ever can, it'll just move somewhere else. Another abandoned truck stop will suddenly have lights on at 3 a.m. Another bathroom will have a backward sign and wet footprints that lead nowhere. Because it's not really about the building, it's about what lives underneath. What's always been there in the pipes, in the dark spaces, in the places where reality gets thin and things can push through. Things that used to be human, things that never were human, things that feed on humans. Early Puckett is just the latest caretaker, the latest face of something that's been feeding travelers since before there were highways, before there were trucks, back when it was coaching inns and wayside taverns where travelers disappeared. The Diesel King is just the modern version of something ancient and hungry. But knowing that doesn't make it easier to drive past at 3 a.m. when my bladder is full and the next safe stop is an hour away. Doesn't make it easier to ignore those lights that shouldn't be on, that sign that shouldn't be spinning, that promises a bathroom just a few steps away. Sometimes I almost give in. Sometimes I find myself slowing down, considering, rationalizing. It's been years, maybe it's gone. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe just this once it would be safe. The need gets so strong it overrides logic, overrides fear, overrides memory. But then I remember the footprints. The wet, wrong footprints appearing from nowhere. I remember Early's shifting face and too many teeth. I remember the voices in the pipes, the black water rising, the things that Thurl Coker saw feeding, And I keep driving. Always keep driving. That's the only rule that matters on the dark highways. When you see something wrong, something that shouldn't be there, something that makes your primitive brain scream warnings, you keep driving, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much you need to stop, no matter how safe it looks. In 31 years of hauling freight across this country, I've helped dozens of stranded motorists, changed tires in the rain, given jump starts in freezing weather, shared gas cans with folks who misjudged their fuel gauge. It's what we do out here on the road. We look out for each other. But what happened on Highway 191 through Utah last September changed everything. Now, I don't stop for anyone. Not anymore. My name's Ott Billings. I was running a load of electronics from Phoenix to Salt Lake City, pushing to make an early morning delivery. It was 3:20 a.m. when I saw her, and I remember the exact time because I'd just checked my watch, calculating if I could make my delivery window without violating hours of service. She was standing next to a white sedan on the shoulder, waving her arms in that desperate way people do when they really need help. The car's hood was up, hazard lights blinking. In my headlights, I could see she was young, maybe late 20s, wearing what looked like business clothes, dark skirt suit, like she was coming from or going to something important. Highway 191 at night is no place for anyone to be stranded, especially a woman alone. It's empty desert for miles in every direction, no cell service, no towns, nothing but sagebrush and rocks and the occasional coyote. The temperature drops hard after sunset, even in September. She had to be freezing. I started downshifting, easing my Peterbilt onto the shoulder about 50 feet past her car. In my side mirror, I watched her run toward my truck, and something felt off right away. She was running in heels, but too smoothly, too easily, like the rough gravel shoulder was a polished floor. Nobody runs that well in heels on uneven ground. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, though I knew there wouldn't be service out here. Also tucked my .45 into the back of my waistband, hidden under my jacket. 31 years on the road teaches you to be helpful but careful. When I climbed down from the cab, she was already there, standing maybe 10 feet away. Up close, I could see she was pretty in a way that seemed almost too perfect, like those AI-generated faces you see online. Symmetrical features, flawless skin despite supposedly being stranded in the desert. Not a hair out of place. "Oh, thank God," she said, and her voice had this quality to it that made my skin prickle. Too smooth, too modulated, like someone doing a perfect impression of relief rather than actually feeling it. "I've been out here for hours. My car just died and my phone has no signal." Her name was Fern Knotts, she said. She was driving from Vegas to Denver for a job interview. Took 191 as a shortcut someone had recommended. The car had started making noises, then just died. She'd been waiting for 3 hours and I was the first vehicle to stop. But here's the thing. I'd driven this stretch of 191 4 hours earlier heading south. There had been no broken-down white sedan, no woman waving for help. Nothing but empty road. And she said she'd been there for 3 hours. "Let me take a look," I said, walking toward her car but keeping distance between us. "Maybe it's something simple." The car was a Toyota Camry, maybe 5 years old, clean, no visible damage. The engine compartment looked normal when I shined my light on it. No obvious problems, no leaking fluids, no broken belts. I asked her to try starting it, and she handed me the keys without hesitation. That was weird thing number 2. What woman alone on a desert highway hands her car keys to a stranger that easily? No hesitation, no wariness, just complete trust that seemed unnatural. I got in the driver's seat, and the interior was wrong. It smelled new, like a rental car, but also had this underlying scent I couldn't identify. Sweet but chemical, like flowers made of plastic. The seat was adjusted for someone much taller than Fern, and when I turned the key, the engine started immediately. Smooth, no problems at all. "That's impossible," Fern said from right beside my window, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I hadn't heard her approach. It wouldn't start for me. I tried for 20 minutes. I turned off the engine, got out, and handed her back the keys. She was standing too close inside that personal space bubble everyone has. Her perfume was strong, that same plastic flower smell but more intense. And her eyes. In the beam of my flashlight, her pupils didn't contract. They stayed dilated, wide and black, like she was in complete darkness even with light shining directly at them. "Seems to be working now," I said, taking a step back. "You should be good to go." Her expression changed then, shifted from grateful to something else. Frustrated maybe, or calculating. Like when you're playing chess and your opponent doesn't make the move you expected. "But I'm scared to drive alone," she said, and her voice had changed too. Lower, more persuasive, almost hypnotic. "What if it breaks down again? Could you follow me to the next town? Or maybe I could ride with you." Every instinct I'd developed in 3 decades of driving was screaming warnings. This wasn't a stranded motorist. This was something else, something wearing the shape of a stranded motorist. "I'll call Highway Patrol for you," I said, pulling out my phone, even though I knew there was no signal. "They can escort you to town." "No!" The word came out sharp, almost a bark. Then she seemed to catch herself. Her face rearranged itself into a pleading expression that looked practiced, rehearsed. "I mean, please, I just need someone to follow me. Just to the next exit, please?" That's when I saw the others. Movement in my peripheral vision made me turn. About 30 feet into the desert, barely visible in the darkness, were shapes. Human-shaped, but wrong. Standing perfectly still, watching. I counted at least 6, maybe more. They weren't trying to hide anymore, just standing there like mannequins someone had arranged in the sagebrush. "Friends of yours?" I asked Fern, keeping my voice steady despite my heart hammering. She didn't even look. "What friends? I'm alone." But she was smiling now, and the smile was wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth. And the teeth were wrong too. Too white, too uniform, like dentures made for someone who'd never seen real human teeth. I backed toward my truck, keeping my eyes on her. She followed, matching my pace exactly, maintaining that exact same too close distance. The figures in the desert started moving too, parallel to us, gliding more than walking through the brush. "Don't go," Fern said, and her voice was doing something impossible now, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. "We need your help. We've been waiting so long for someone to stop." "We?" I asked, though I didn't really want to know. "The others," she said, gesturing toward the desert without looking. "We've been here so long, so many nights, waiting for someone kind enough to stop, someone helpful, someone alone." I reached my truck, grabbed the door handle. That's when she moved, faster than anyone should be able to move, suddenly, right there with her hand over mine on the handle. Her skin was cold, too cold for someone who'd been standing in the desert, and had a texture that wasn't quite right. Like vinyl, trying to feel like flesh. "You can't leave," she said, and now her voice wasn't even pretending to be normal. It was layered, multiple voices speaking in unison, men and women, and something that wasn't quite either. No one leaves after they stop. That's the rule. I yanked my hand away, pulled the .45 from my waistband. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass harmonizing with itself. "That won't help," she said. "We're not what you think we are." What are you then? She tilted her head at an angle that would have snapped a normal person's neck. Hungry. The figures from the desert were closer now, emerging into the ring of light from my truck's markers. They were all wrong. Bodies that moved with too much fluidity, faces that were almost human but not quite, like someone's memory of faces rather than actual faces. Men, women, even what looked like children, all with those same dilated pupils, all with that same too perfect appearance. One of them I recognized, or thought I did. A trucker I'd met once at a Flying J in Nevada, guy named Burley Hooks. But Burley had gone missing 6 months ago, his rig found abandoned on this very stretch of highway. "Burley?" I called out. The thing that looked like Burley turned toward me, and its mouth opened wider than any mouth should, revealing darkness that seemed to go on forever. When it spoke, it was with Burley's voice but wrong, like a recording played through broken speakers. "Stop to help," it said. "Nice lady, car trouble, couldn't leave." Then quieter, like an echo of the real Burley trapped somewhere inside. "Run." I didn't need to be told twice. I jumped up into my cab, slamming the door and hitting the locks. They surrounded the truck immediately, dozens of them now, all pressing against the windows, all with those terrible dilated eyes and too perfect faces. Fern was at my driver's side window, tapping with one finger. "Open up, Ott," she said, and hearing my name in her multiple voices made my blood freeze. "You stopped to help. That means you're ours now. Those are the rules." I started the engine, put it in gear. They didn't move, didn't try to get out of the way. I had 80,000 pounds of truck and cargo, and I was ready to use it. But as I started to pull forward, something impossible happened. The truck wouldn't move. Not wouldn't, couldn't. The engine was running, the transmission was engaged, but we weren't moving. It was like the space around the truck had become solid, like we were trapped in invisible amber. Fern laughed again. "You can't leave until we feed, and we're so very hungry, Ott. We've been hungry for so long." The windows started to crack. Not from impact, but from cold. The temperature inside the cab was dropping fast, my breath coming out in clouds. Frost spread across the glass in patterns that looked almost like reaching fingers. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to say. She was from the old country, full of superstitions and folklore. One thing she always insisted on: evil things needed permission to enter. They needed to be invited, or they needed you to accept their help, or they needed you to stop for them willingly. But I'd stopped willingly. I'd chosen to help. Or had I? "I stopped to help someone in distress," I said out loud, my voice shaking from cold and fear. "But you were never in distress. The contract is void." The frost stopped spreading. Fern's tapping became pounding. "You stopped!" she shrieked in her multiple voices. "That's all that matters." "I stopped for a lie," I said, more confident now. "You were never broken down, you were never stranded. I stopped to help someone who didn't exist." The pounding stopped. The figures around my truck stood still, and for a moment, there was absolute silence except for my engine idling. Then Fern spoke. But now it was just one voice, quiet and old and tired. "Clever," she said. "But you still stopped. And even if the contract is void, we're still hungry. We can wait. Your fuel won't last forever. Your will won't last forever. Eventually you'll have to open the door." She was right. I had maybe 3/4 of a tank, enough for several hours of idling, but not forever. And already the cold was seeping in, the frost making it hard to see out the windows. I couldn't call for help, I couldn't drive away. I was trapped. That's when I heard the horn. Another truck coming up from the south, air horn blaring in a pattern I recognized. 3 long, 3 short, 3 long, SOS. But also a warning to other truckers, danger ahead. The figures around my truck turned toward the sound, and in that moment of distraction, whatever was holding my truck in place loosened. Not completely, but enough. I gunned it, the big diesel roaring, wheels spinning for a moment before catching. The truck lurched forward, and I felt things crunch under my wheels. Not like running over people, more like crushing empty shells, hollow things that looked solid but weren't. In my mirrors, lit red by my taillights, I saw them reforming, the crushed figures standing back up, reshaping themselves from whatever they really were into those almost human forms. Fern was standing in the middle of the road, not chasing, just watching. And smiling, the other truck passed me going the opposite direction, never slowing. The driver had seen something that made him warn others but not stop to help. Smart man. I wondered what he'd seen, if he'd noticed the figures or if they'd hidden from him, saving their show for someone who actually stopped. I drove for 2 hours before stopping for fuel, and even then, I chose the busiest, brightest truck stop I could find. Lots of people, lots of lights, lots of normal human activity. When I finally felt safe enough to check the news on my phone, I found what I was afraid I'd find. 3 drivers had gone missing on Highway 191 in the last 2 months. All single operators, all driving alone, all vanished without a trace. Their trucks were found on the shoulder, engines running, doors open, no sign of struggle. The latest had been just a week ago. I found more when I dug deeper. Forum posts about the 191 Phantom, stories going back years about a woman with car trouble who wasn't quite right. Drivers who'd stopped to help and barely escaped, others who'd stopped and were never seen again. One post stood out from a driver named Carol Martin in 2019. She said her name was Fern, pretty woman, white car, broken down. Something felt wrong, so I didn't get out of my truck, just called out that I'd radio for help. She begged me to come look at her engine, got angry when I wouldn't. That's when I saw the others in the desert. Dozens of them, all just standing there, waiting. I drove off, and in my mirror, I swear I saw them all just disappear, like they were never there. Another from 2015. Pulled over to help a woman named Fern on 191. Soon as I got close, knew something was wrong. Too perfect, like a doll. Eyes all black, even in my flashlight. Ran back to my rig and booked it. Saw at least 20 people standing in the desert, all perfectly still, all watching. Reported it to Highway Patrol, but they found nothing. The oldest post I could find was from 2008, barely coherent, from someone claiming to be Burley Hooks. They're not people. They're something else. They feed on help, on kindness, on the act of stopping. Once you stop for them willingly, you belong to them. I stopped. I couldn't leave. I'm still here. We're all still here. Don't stop on 191. Please don't stop. That post was made 6 months after Burley had supposedly died. I reported what happened to the Highway Patrol, leaving out the impossible parts. Told them about a group of people trying to run some kind of scam or ambush using a woman with a fake breakdown. They said they'd investigate, but I could tell from their tone they'd heard similar stories before. Too many similar stories. I don't drive that route anymore. Told my company I'd take a pay cut rather than haul anything through that stretch of 191. They weren't happy, but when I told them why, really told them, the dispatcher got quiet. Turns out 3 of their drivers had refused that route in the last year, all with similar stories. They don't assign solo drivers to it anymore. But sometimes I think about them. Fern and the others, still out there on that empty stretch of highway, still waiting for someone to stop. I think about Burley Hooks, or the thing wearing his shape, warning me even as it tried to trap me. I wonder how many of those figures in the desert were once drivers who stopped to help, who fell for the trap, who became part of it. And I wonder about Fern herself. Was she the original? The first one to get trapped somehow, turned into bait for others? Or was she something else entirely? Something that had never been human, just wearing the shape of someone who needed help. There's a new driver at my company. Young woman named Jessica. She's fearless, takes all the night runs, all the lonely routes. I've tried to warn her about 191, about Fern, about what's waiting out there. She listens politely, but I can see she doesn't really believe. Thinks it's just old trucker superstition. Last week, she took a load through Utah. Said she'd go up 191 to save time. I begged her not to, or at least to never stop, no matter what she saw. She promised she'd be careful, but promises don't mean much at 3 a.m. when you see someone who needs help. She made it through fine, checked in when she reached Salt Lake City, but when I asked if she'd seen anything, she got quiet. "There was a woman," she finally said. "White car, hood up, standing by the road waving for help. You didn't stop?" "No, remembered what you said, but..." She paused. As I passed, I looked in my mirror. The woman, the car, they just vanished, like they were never there, and I swear I saw people in the desert, just standing there watching me drive by. "Good," I said. "You did good." But she wasn't done. The woman, when my headlights hit her face, she looked familiar. Looked like a driver I met once at a truck stop in Nevada. Lady named Patricia, really nice, helped me with directions when I was new, but Patricia went missing 3 months ago. They're collecting people. That's what I think now. Every person who stops, who falls for the trap, becomes part of it. Another figure in the desert, another piece of bait to lure the next Good Samaritan. Growing their numbers, spreading their reach, getting better at mimicking human distress. I've researched every missing driver case along 191 for the past 20 years. The numbers are staggering. Officially, they're attributed to accidents, voluntary disappearances, various rational explanations. But the pattern is clear. Solo drivers, nighttime, that same stretch of highway. And in many cases, the last reported sighting was of them stopping to help someone. The thing that haunts me most is the hunger Fern mentioned. What do they feed on? Is it the act of helping itself? Some kind of energy released when someone chooses kindness? Or is it something more physical, more horrible? The fact that bodies are never found suggests something worse than simple death. I've thought about going back during daylight, with others, with cameras, with weapons. Try to document them, prove they exist, warn others with evidence. But every time I consider it, I remember the cold, the way space itself seemed to freeze around my truck. Whatever they are, they're not bound by the normal rules. Confronting them might just add more figures to their collection in the desert. So I do what I can. I warn other drivers. I share my story at truck stops, on forums, anywhere truckers gather. Some believe, some don't. But if even one driver remembers my warning when they see Fern standing by her white car at 3 a.m., if even one keeps driving instead of stopping, then it's worth sounding crazy. The road is dangerous enough with normal hazards, weather, mechanical failures, other drivers. But there are things out there that use our humanity against us, that turn our instinct to help into a trap. Things that wait in the dark places between towns, patient and hungry and growing in number. Highway 191 through Utah has one of those things. Fern Knotts, who may never have been Fern Knotts at all, stands by her white car every night, waiting for someone to stop and help. And when someone does, they join the collection in the desert. Another piece of bait, another lost soul who stopped to help and became something else. I still help people when I can, but now I'm careful. I watch for signs of wrongness, pupils that don't contract, movements that are too smooth. perfection that feels manufactured. I keep my distance, stay in my truck when possible, always have an escape route. Because I know what's out there, wearing the face of someone in need. The guilt eats at me sometimes. Every time I pass someone who might genuinely need help, every time I don't stop because something feels off, I wonder if I'm letting fear override compassion. But then I remember Fern's multiple voices, Burley's warning, the figures in the desert all standing still and watching. And I keep driving. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from another driver, old friend named Marcus. He'd seen something on 191, wanted to know if I'd experienced anything similar. He'd stopped for a woman with a broken-down white car. Fern, of course. But Marcus was smart, paranoid from years of driving. He'd stayed in his truck, kept the engine running, doors locked. She kept trying to get me to come look at her engine, he said. Got more and more insistent. That's when I noticed her reflection in my side mirror didn't match what I was seeing through the windshield. In the mirror, she had no face, just smooth skin where features should be. He'd driven off, but not before seeing the others. Must have been 50 of them, he said, all standing in formation in the desert, like an army. And I recognized some of them. Drivers I'd known, drivers who'd gone missing. The collection is growing, more people stopping, more joining the figures in the desert. And Fern is still there every night, perfect and pretty and wrong, waving for help with movements too smooth to be human. I've left instructions with my wife. If I ever go missing on the road, don't look for me on 191. Don't stop for anyone on that stretch of highway, no matter how much they seem to need help. Because if I disappear out there, I won't be me anymore. I'll be one of them, standing in the desert, waiting for the next kind soul to stop. The worst part is knowing they're winning. Every person who stops and doesn't escape becomes part of the trap. The collection grows, the bait becomes more convincing, more varied. It's not just Fern now, it's Patricia, Burley, dozens of others, all preserved in whatever twisted form they've become, all used to lure more drivers. I dream about them sometimes. In the dreams, I'm driving 191 at night, and I see myself standing by the road waving for help. Dream me always stops, always gets out, always walks toward road me, and road me smiles with too many teeth and says, "You should have kept driving." Then I wake up, check that I'm still myself, still human, still able to leave when I choose. But the dream feels like a promise, like a preview of something inevitable. Like eventually, we all stop on 191. Eventually, we all join the collection. But not today, not tonight. Tonight I'm staying on the main routes, the safe routes, the ones where people are still people and breakdowns are just breakdowns. Tonight I'm driving past anyone who needs help, radioing ahead for them but never stopping, never taking the chance. Because I know what's out there. I know what waits on Highway 191 at 3 a.m. I know what Fern Knotts really is, what the figures in the desert want, what happens to those who stop. And knowing that, I'll never stop for anyone again. The guilt is better than joining them. The shame is better than becoming them. Living with the knowledge that I don't help anymore is better than becoming one more piece of bait, one more figure in the desert, one more trap for the next driver. So remember this, if you're ever on Highway 191 through Utah at night, and you see a woman with a broken-down white car, keep driving. No matter how real her distress seems, no matter how much she needs help, no matter how guilty you feel, keep driving. I've been hauling freight for 19 years. And I've delivered to every kind of facility you can imagine. Modern distribution centers with automated systems, old warehouses that smell like rust and regret, sketchy cash-only operations that make you count your fingers after shaking hands. But nothing in my career prepared me for what happened at the Brackenridge Industrial Complex outside Pittsburgh last winter. My name's Jess Wooten, and I was hauling a load of industrial chemicals from a plant in Houston to a warehouse in Pittsburgh. The delivery was scheduled for 3:30 a.m., which wasn't unusual. Lots of places prefer night deliveries to avoid traffic and keep their day shifts clear for other work. What was unusual was the specific instructions. Building 7, loading Dock C, ask for Slim Bledsoe, and don't talk to anyone else. The Brackenridge Industrial Complex was old, really old. Built in the 1940s for the war effort, changed hands a dozen times since then. Half the buildings were abandoned, roofs caving in, windows broken out like dead eyes. The other half were supposedly still operational, but driving through those gates at 3:15 a.m., the whole place felt like a cemetery for American industry. My GPS led me through a maze of crumbling roads between the buildings. No lights except my headlights and the occasional security lamp that flickered like it was about to give up. The numbers on the buildings were mostly gone, but I found Building 7 by process of elimination. It was one of the newer-looking structures, which meant it was only falling apart instead of already collapsed. Loading Dock C was around back, down an alley so narrow my mirrors almost scraped the walls. There were 4 dock doors, but only C had a light on above it, a single yellow bulb that made everything look sick. I backed up to the dock, set my brakes, and killed the engine. The silence hit me immediately. You get used to background noise in industrial areas, ventilation systems, generators, the distant beep of forklifts. But this place was tomb quiet. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. I climbed out and walked to the dock door. There was a button labeled Ring for Service that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since Kennedy was president. I pressed it and heard a buzz somewhere deep in the building, echoing like I'd woken something up. For about 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps, but they were wrong. Too heavy, too rhythmic, like someone was deliberately stomping in time to a beat only they could hear. The dock door started rolling up, groaning and squealing like it was in pain. The man standing there was tall and thin to the point of being skeletal. His coveralls hung on him like they were draped on a scarecrow. The name patch said Slim Bledsoe in faded red letters. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, and his eyes were so deep set they looked like caves. "You're early," he said, and his voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized but didn't understand. I checked my watch, 3:27 a.m. Dispatch said 3:30. "Early," he repeated, then turned and walked into the warehouse without another word. I followed him inside and immediately wished I hadn't. The warehouse was wrong in every way a place could be wrong. The lights were on, but they were all different colors, some white, some yellow, some an ugly green that made everything look underwater. The racks of inventory went up maybe 30 feet, but they were mostly empty, and what was there was covered in dust so thick it looked like snow. But it was the other workers that made my skin crawl. There were maybe a dozen of them, all in the same faded coveralls, all moving with that same mechanical rhythm. Loading boxes, driving forklifts, walking from point A to point B. But all of it was wrong. They moved in patterns, repetitive loops, like those old video games where the background characters just do the same thing over and over. One guy was loading boxes onto a pallet. He'd pick up a box, place it on the pallet, turn around to get another box, but there were no more boxes. So he'd mime picking up a box, place the invisible box on the pallet, turn around, and do it again. He'd been at it long enough that there were worn spots on the floor where he pivoted. Another worker was driving a forklift in a perfect figure-8 pattern, over and over, not carrying anything, not going anywhere, just driving that same route like a toy on a track. The forklift's tires had worn grooves in the concrete from countless repetitions. "Your paperwork," Slim Bledsoe said, holding out his hand. I handed him the bill of lading, trying not to stare at the worker closest to us who was sweeping the same 3-foot square of floor over and over, the broom bristles long since worn away to nothing. Slim looked at the paperwork, but his eyes weren't moving, weren't reading. He was just holding it, staring at it for exactly 30 seconds. I know, because I counted. Then he handed it back. "Bay 7, he said, pointing to a dock door on the far side of the warehouse. "Back in. We'll unload." I wanted to leave right then. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was deeply wrong here. But I had a job to do, a load to deliver, and I dealt with weird warehouse crews before. Maybe it was drugs. Maybe it was some kind of mental health facility work program. Maybe they were just very, very strange people working the night shift. I went back to my truck, started it up, and maneuvered around to Bay 7. As I was backing in, I saw something in my mirror that made me stop. One of the workers, a heavy-set man in those same coveralls, was standing perfectly still in the middle of the lot, facing my truck. Just standing there, arms at his sides, not moving at all. I finished backing in, set the brakes, and got out to open my trailer doors. The heavy-set man was gone, vanished in the few seconds I'd looked away, but there were wet footprints on the concrete where he'd been standing, even though it hadn't rained in days. When I opened the trailer, Slim was right there, too close, like he'd materialized out of nowhere. Behind him were 4 other workers, all standing in a perfect line, all with that same vacant expression. "We'll handle the unloading," Slim said. "You wait in the office." He pointed to a door marked "Office" in peeling letters. I didn't want to go in there, didn't want to turn my back on these people. But refusing would mean explaining why, and what would I say? That they were creepy? That they moved wrong? That the whole place felt like a trap about to spring? The office was small, maybe 10 by 10, with a desk, 2 chairs, and a coffee maker that looked like it hadn't been used since the Reagan administration. The walls were covered with safety posters from the 1960s, all faded and water-stained. There was a window that looked out into the warehouse, and through it, I could watch them unload my trailer. They worked in perfect synchronization, but wrong. They'd all reach for boxes at the exact same moment, all lift at the exact same moment, all turn at the exact same moment. Like they were all puppets controlled by the same hand, and they were too strong. Those chemical drums weighed 300 pounds each, but they were lifting them like they were empty, one-handed, casual. That's when I noticed the calendar on the wall. It was turned to December 1987, 35 years ago, but there were fresh marks on it, X's marking off days, stopping on December 15th. I looked closer at the safety posters. In one of them, a group of workers stood around a forklift, demonstrating proper lifting technique. One of those workers looked exactly like Slim Bledsoe. Not similar. Exactly the same. But the poster was from 1963. My phone buzzed. A text from dispatch. "Delivery confirmed at Brackenridge? GPS shows you've been there for 20 minutes. I typed back, "Still unloading, something weird here." The response was immediate. "Brackenridge closed in 1987. Where are you?" My blood turned to ice. I looked out the window again. The workers were still unloading, but now I could see it clearly. They weren't just moving in sync, they were flickering, like a film with frames missing. One moment they'd be at the truck, the next at the storage racks with no movement in between. I tried to call dispatch, but my phone was dead. Not low battery, dead. The screen wouldn't even turn on. The door to the office opened and a new person walked in. He was wearing a security uniform, badge reading Lloyd Yates, and he looked more normal than the others, more present, more aware. But his uniform was decades out of date, and there was something about his eyes that made me step back. "You shouldn't be here," Lloyd said, and unlike the others, his voice had emotion in it. Fear. "The building's been closed since the accident." "What accident?" "December 15th, 1907, he said, glancing at the calendar. "Chemical spill. Killed everyone on the night shift. 13 workers. They sealed the building for 3 months, then reopened, but..." He trailed off, looking through the window at the workers. "They came back, kept working. Every night, 3:30 a.m., they come back and do their shifts." "That's impossible." "Is it?" He gestured at the warehouse. "You've been watching them. You know they're not right. They're stuck, repeating the same shift over and over. And anyone who stays too long gets stuck too." I moved toward the door, but Lloyd stepped in front of it. "It's too late," he said, and I could see through him now, could see he was fading, becoming translucent. "You've been here too long. You're part of the pattern now." I pushed past him, through him, and ran into the warehouse. The workers had finished unloading my truck, but they weren't dispersing. They were all standing in a circle around Bay 7, facing inward, waiting. "Time for shift change," Slim Bledsoe said, but his voice came from everywhere, echoing off the walls. "You're the new hire, Jess. Welcome to the night shift." The lights started flickering, strobing between different colors, and in those flashes, I saw the truth. The warehouse was empty, had been for decades. Broken windows, collapsed roof sections, rust and decay everywhere. But overlaid on that reality was the other reality, the one where the night shift never ended, where the workers kept working, where December 15th, 1987 repeated forever. And I was caught between them. I ran for my truck, but it flickered too. One moment it was there, my 2019 Freightliner. The next it was a 1980s Peterbilt with Wooten Trucking on the door, a company that never existed, a truck I'd never driven, but somehow I remembered driving it, remembered delivering here before, remembered the chemical spill, remembered dying. No, that wasn't me. That wasn't my memory. I forced myself to focus on what was real. My name is Jess Wooten. The year is 2023. I'm alive. I'm not part of this. The flickering slowed. My truck solidified as my Freightliner. I jumped in, started the engine, and threw it in gear. The workers moved to block me, but they were moving in their patterns, their loops, and I could see the gaps. I drove through them, or maybe through the spaces where they weren't, where they had never been. Slim Bledsoe appeared in front of my truck, solid as a wall. "You can't leave. No one leaves the night shift." I floored it, passed right through him like he was fog. But as I did, I felt it, the pull, the weight of 35 years of repetition trying to drag me back, trying to make me part of the pattern. I could feel memories that weren't mine, working here, dying here, coming back here, over and over and over. The exit was ahead, but it was wrong. Sometimes it was the modern gate, sometimes it was the old one from 1987. Sometimes it was just a wall. Reality was breaking down, or maybe breaking through. I aimed for where I remembered the exit being and hoped. I crashed through something. Not a gate, not a wall, but something that felt like breaking through ice, cold and sharp and final. Then I was on the street, the real street, with real streetlights and real buildings that weren't stuck in 1987. I drove for 5 miles before I dared to stop, pulling into a 24-hour gas station that was bright and modern and full of normal people doing normal things. I called dispatch, told them the delivery was complete, left out the impossible parts. But when I checked the paperwork, the bill of lading had changed. The delivery address wasn't the Brackenridge Industrial Complex. It was a modern distribution center on the other side of Pittsburgh. The signature on the receiving form wasn't Slim Bledsoe. It was someone named Mark Johnson, time-stamped 3:47 a.m. My phone had no record of the text exchange about Brackenridge being closed. My GPS history showed me driving straight to the distribution center, no detour to any abandoned industrial complex. But I knew what happened. I knew where I'd been. I researched Brackenridge when I got home. It was real. Had been closed since December 15, 1987, when a chemical spill killed 13 night shift workers. The building was demolished in '94. There's a shopping center there now. I found the list of victims. Slim Bledsoe, foreman. Lloyd Yates, security. 11 others, all names I'd seen on coveralls in that impossible warehouse. I found one more thing. A newspaper article from 1988 about truckers reporting strange lights and sounds from the abandoned Brackenridge complex. Some claimed they'd made deliveries there months after it closed. Others said they'd seen workers through the broken windows, still loading and unloading trucks that weren't there. The article treated it as an urban legend, a ghost story truckers told each other. But at the bottom, there was a quote from a driver named William Jessup. I delivered there in January. Slim Bledsoe signed for it. I don't care that he's supposed to be dead. He signed for it, and the load was gone from my truck. You explain that. William Jessup disappeared 3 months after that article was published. His truck was found on the side of the road, engine running, doors locked from the inside. No sign of him. I don't drive through Pittsburgh anymore. I take the long way around, add hours to my route, eat the extra fuel costs. The company doesn't like it, but they don't push it either. Too many drivers have issues with Pittsburgh, they say. Too many stories about deliveries to places that don't exist. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving past cities with old industrial districts, I see them. Flickers of light in abandoned buildings. Shadows moving in patterns behind broken windows. Workers still working shifts that ended decades ago. And sometimes, in my mirrors, I see a 1980s Peterbilt with Wooten Trucking on the door, following me. The driver looks like me, but older, more tired, wearing coveralls with my name on them. He follows for a few miles, then takes an exit that doesn't exist, heading to a warehouse that was demolished 30 years ago. I think that's the me that didn't escape. The me that got caught in the pattern, stuck in 1987, still making deliveries to the Brackenridge Industrial Complex every night at 3:30 a.m. Still part of Slim Bledsoe's crew. Still unloading trucks in a warehouse that exists in the space between what was and what is. There's a new driver at my company, eager kid named Tony. He asked me about the Pittsburgh routes, said he'd heard other drivers talking about avoiding certain areas. I told him everything. About Brackenridge, about Slim Bledsoe, about the night shift that never ends. He laughed, said it sounded like a movie, but I gave him the articles, the research, the names of other drivers who'd experienced it. His laugh faded when he realized I was serious. So, these places just exist? Buildings that aren't there but are? They exist at 3 a.m., I told him. When reality is thin and the past bleeds through, they exist for drivers who are alone, tired, following GPS coordinates that shouldn't work but do. He promised to be careful, to stick to the modern facilities, to never deliver to anywhere that felt wrong. But promises don't mean much when your dispatcher sends you to an address that doesn't exist, when your GPS leads you to an abandoned industrial complex when Slim Bledsoe is waiting at loading dock C. I check the news sometimes looking for missing drivers in Pittsburgh. There are more than there should be. Trucks found abandoned, drivers vanished, no explanation. I wonder how many of them made deliveries to Brackenridge. How many of them met Slim Bledsoe? How many of them are still there, stuck in December 1907, working the night shift that never ends? The worst part is the memory that isn't mine. The memory of dying in that chemical spill, of breathing in fumes that burned like acid, of falling to the warehouse floor as everything went dark. And then the memory of standing back up, of going back to work, of loading and unloading trucks while dead, while gone, while caught between. That memory feels more real every day. Like it's not a memory of something that happened to someone else, but something that's going to happen to me. Like maybe I didn't escape at all. Maybe I'm still there, in that warehouse, and this is just the dream I'm having while I work, while I repeat the pattern, while Slim Bledsoe watches with his cave-deep eyes. Sometimes I wake up at 3:30 a.m. exactly, every night for weeks. And in those moments I can hear it. The sound of forklifts, of trucks backing up, of Slim's voice saying, "You're early." And I know that somewhere, in some when, I'm still there. Still working. Still part of the night shift. The road has many secrets. Some of them are places that shouldn't exist, but do. Some of them are people who shouldn't be there, but are. And some of them are traps that catch you even when you escape, that follow you home, that make you question which reality is real. The Brackenridge Industrial Complex was demolished in '94. But every night at 3:30 a.m. it rebuilds itself in the space between what was and what is. Slim Bledsoe and his crew clock in for their shift. And somewhere, in some reality, so do I. I've written letters to my family, explaining what happened, warning them. If I disappear, if my truck is found abandoned, don't look for me in Pittsburgh. Don't go to where Brackenridge used to be, because I'll be there. But I won't be me anymore. I'll be part of the pattern, part of the shift, part of the thing that shouldn't exist but does.